A part-time job is often a young person's first taste of independence, and one entry point into adult responsibilities. It can be more fun if it's a job worked alongside a friend, someone to talk to, joke with, and share the time and responsibilities with in a way that makes the hours go by just a little faster. In 1993, Seann Campbell and Bryan Benson were two such coworkers. They were both 20 years old, and both were part-time clerks at West Coast Video, a video rental store located in the Rosemore Shopping Center in Warminster, Pennsylvania. No one thinks that a part-time job worked with a friend will end in tragedy, but for Seann and Bryan it did. Both young men were brutally murdered the evening of November 10th, 1993, just as they were closing up the video store for the night. Almost 30 years later, there have been no answers as to who murdered these two bright, promising young men. Bryan G. Benson was born in April 1973 to Janice and Gary Benson. He was the middle child of 3 boys and was an easygoing peacemaker between his 2 brothers, Andy and Eric. As he grew into a young man and attained more independence, he was still responsible. His mother said that Bryan didn't stay out late without calling home to let her know. He was an independent-minded person who, quote, marched to his own drum, unquote, having interest in music, sports, art, and movies. Bryan enjoyed decorating his bedroom with posters from his favorite movies, favorite bands, or just funny images that made you laugh, including a poster of the infamous "Expose Yourself to Art" photograph. Seann J. Campbell was born on January 29, 1973. His birth was followed 8 years later by a sister, Lane. At some point, his mother Bonnie married Greg Youngers, who would become Sean's stepfather. Greg seems to have had a close and caring relationship with his stepson, having helped Seann build his own bedroom at one point. Like many young people, Seann was someone who had an interest in multiple topics, and at age 20 didn't have a completely solid grasp on what field he planned to go into as a lifelong career. Architectural engineering was an interest, but so was law enforcement. He collected books on the latter topic, and according to Bonnie Youngers, quote, he was interested in issues of juvenile justice and deterrence. I really think law enforcement was where he eventually would have headed, unquote. Both young men came from stable backgrounds, and both still lived with their parents. Both would end up working for their local West Coast Video, which at the time was a video rental store franchise that had stores all over the USA. Seann had worked part-time at the West Coast Video store since he was in his early teens. A hard worker, he also held down a full-time job at Sylvan Pools. Bryan also worked part-time at the video store, but was a recent hire compared to his friend. He also attended Bucks County Community College, where he studied film. The fateful night of November 10th, 1993 seemed uneventful at first. Bryan arrived around 5 p.m. for what he thought was a scheduled shift, only for his manager to tell him that he wasn't on the schedule. The manager asked if Bryan could stay, however, to which Bryan agreed. Seann was also working at the store. Around 9 p.m., Bryan's father Gary stopped by to check out some videos. Seeing that nothing was amiss, he concluded his business at West Coast Video and didn't hang around. Sometime around 10 p.m., the young men started to close up the store, but were attacked in the secluded adult video section of the store. Whether they were herded there by an attacker or a group of attackers, or were ambushed by assailants who had been hiding in the adult video section before closing, is impossible to determine. The number of assailants is also unknown, but police believe there were more than one. Bryan and Seann were both strong, fit young men, and Bryan suffered defensive lacerations to his arms. A fierce struggle for life ensued. The attackers stabbed Bryan and Seann with long knives, inflicting deep wounds on their necks and chests. but one of the victims managed to rip out an attacker's earring, leaving the gold stud with its fake diamond behind on the floor, flecked with blood and tissue. Despite Seann and Bryan's fight for life, they were overwhelmed. Their attacker or attackers left them to die, and their lifeless bodies were found the following morning by their manager, who had arrived to open the store. Fear laid heavy on the community of Warminster, as everyone trapped in the epicenter of the violence struggled to find answers. Answers that proved elusive. Individuals and businesses alike placed $52,000 into a reward fund, promised to anyone who gave information leading to an arrest for the killings. Robbery was considered as a potential motive. $300 had been taken from the register, but more money had been left behind, and neither Seann nor Bryan's wallets had been touched. The wire to the security camera had been cut, but the camera wouldn't have been on during the attack anyway. It only turned on when the store was closed. Was it a crime of revenge rather than a botched robbery? Did one or both of the victims have an enemy, perhaps a person that they knew nothing about? Police interviewed more than 300 people, including 75 people who had rented or returned videos during the roughly 5-hour period that the young men were on duty at the store, and came up empty-handed. Physical clues were equally difficult to uncover. The blood-flecked earring yielded DNA samples, but no match was found. A discarded rusted knife was found behind the Rosemore shopping center, but no usable evidence was found to tie it to the killings. Cruelest of all, perhaps, was a 1995 jailhouse confession that turned out to be a hoax. A prisoner named John Hall contacted the Campbell family by phone, claiming that another inmate had confessed to him that he had killed the two young clerks. However, Hall was lying. Now, as then, there are no answers as to what person or persons committed this heinous crime, or why. The loss of a loved one creates a void in a community, in a family, in the heart of each person who knew and cherished them. Warminster collectively mourned the loss of two bright, kind, promising young men who seemed to have had only potential and promise in their futures. Blue ribbons sprang up around trees and posts like flowers in spring, commemorating the young men, saying as a community, "We remember." But as the years passed and evidence became frustratingly hard to find, the ribbons vanished. The families would cope with a very personal loss that would never fully heal or go away. Instead, the loss was a never-ending cycle, each anniversary occurring with not even the prospect of justice for the loss of Seann and Bryan. Children would be born into the two families who would never know Seann or Bryan firsthand. Closure for such a loss is an impossibility. Speaking in 2013 near the 20th anniversary of the slayings, Bonnie Youngers, mother of Seann Campbell, said, quote, "If I never find out who did it, that is okay, because God knows who did it. Closure is when I put the lid down on the casket. That is the only closure I'll get until I die." Janice Benson felt similarly in 2013 about the idea of closure. Quote, "The hurt and pain will always be there. There is no closure. I hate that word. You don't close your son getting murdered." Unquote. Matthew Weintraub, chief of prosecution in the Bucks County DA office, was more hopeful that justice could be found for Seann and Bryan. Speaking in 2013 about the investigation, he said, quote, "This case is personal for us. We are just as anxious to find Seann and Bryan's killers today as we were 20 years ago. I really believe we'll solve this, but we need a lucky break." Unquote. If you have any information about the murders of Seann Campbell and Bryan Benson, contact the Warminster Police Department at 154435000. Thank you for listening to this video. Again, if you have any information about this case, please contact the number shown on the screen.